Hey guys, here we are with chapter 7 of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Make sure again that you are following along in your book or on the PDF. Chapter 7. For 3 years, Ikamafuna lived in Okonkwo's household, and the elders of Umuofia seemed to have forgotten about him. He grew rapidly like a yam tendril in the rainy season and was full of the sap of life. He had become wholly absorbed into his new family. He was like an elder brother to Nwoye, and from the very first seemed to have kindled a new fire in the younger boy. He made him feel grown up, and they no longer spent the evenings in Mother's hut while she cooked, but now sat with Okonkwo in his obi, or watched him as he tapped his palm tree for the evening wine. Nothing pleased Nwoye more than to be sent for by his mother or another of his father's wives to do one of those difficult and masculine tasks in the home, like splitting wood or pounding food. On receiving such a message through a younger brother or sister, Nwoye would feign annoyance and grumble aloud about women and their troubles. Okay, so remember that Ikamafuna is not Okonkwo's son. He was brought to Umuofia as a sacrifice after somebody in the Mabino tribe murdered a woman from Umuofia. So Ikamafuna was brought from Mabino with a young virgin who disappeared. Like, we don't know where she went. And Ikamafuna has just been kind of living in Okonkwo's home with him. So Okonkwo has kind of taken him under his wings, and he seems to be getting along with Okonkwo and his family. Now as kind of time has gone by, he's thinking of them kind of as his family. I want to point out that in this first paragraph of chapter 7, I've mentioned previously that we are often going to see Okonkwo associated with fire and dust and dry things and things that are not really growing and not really thriving. His son, Nwoye, we are going to see associated frequently with the opposite, so with water and with growth. In fact, in this first paragraph, we hear Nwoye, it says, grew rapidly like a yam tendril in the rainy season. So we're seeing kind of this green imagery associated with Nwoye. So keep this in mind, this kind of extended metaphor for Nwoye with water as opposed to Okonkwo with fire. Nwoye is also growing up at the beginning of chapter 7, and we are seeing that he is doing so kind of under the nurturing of Ikamafuna. So what Okonkwo was not able to accomplish with Nwoye in terms of masculinity, Ikamafuna is. Okonkwo was inwardly pleased by his son's development, and he knew it was due to Ikamafuna. He wanted Nwoye to grow into a tough young man capable of ruling his father's household when he was dead and gone to join the ancestors. He wanted him to be a prosperous man, having enough in his barn to feed the ancestors with regular sacrifices. And so he was always happy when he heard him grumbling about women. That showed that in time he would be able to control his womenfolk. No matter how prosperous a man was, if he was unable to rule his women and his children, and especially his women, he was not really a man. He was like the man in the song who had 10 and 1 wives and not enough soup for his fufu. So Okonkwo encouraged the boys to sit with him in his obi, and he told them stories of the land, masculine stories of violence and bloodshed. Nwoye knew that it was right to be masculine and to be violent, but somehow he still preferred the stories that his mother used to tell, and which she no doubt still told to her younger children. Stories of the tortoise and his wily ways, and of the bird Ineki Initi Oba, who challenged the whole world to a wrestling contest and was finally thrown by the cat. He remembered the stories she often told of the quarrel between earth and sky long ago, and how sky withheld rain for 7 years until crops withered and the dead could not be buried because the hose broke on the stony earth. At last, Vulture was sent to plead with Sky and to soften his heart with a song of the suffering of the sons of men. Whenever Nwoye's mother sang this song, he felt carried away to the distant scene in the sky where Vulture, Earth's emissary, sang for mercy. At last, Sky was moved to pity, and he gave to Vulture rain wrapped in leaves of cocoa yam. But as he flew home, his long talon pierced the leaves, and the rain fell as it had never fallen before. And so heavily did it rain on Vulture that he did not return to deliver his message, but flew to a distant land from where he had espied a fire. And when he got there, he found it was a man making a sacrifice. He warmed himself in the fire and ate the entrails. That was the kind of story that Nwoye loved, but he now knew that they were foolish for women and children, and he knew that his father wanted him to be a man. And so he feigned, which is pretended, that he no longer cared for women's stories. And when he did this, he saw that his father was pleased and no longer rebuked him or beat him. So Nwoye and Ikamefuna would listen to Okonkwo's stories about tribal wars, or how years ago he had stalked his victim, overempowered him, and obtained his first human head. And as he told them of the past, they sat in darkness, or the dim glow of logs, waiting for the women to finish their cooking. When they finished, each brought her bowl of fufu and bowl of soup to her husband. An oil lamp was lit, and Okonkwo tasted from each bowl, and then passed 2 shares to Nwoye and Ikamefuna. In this way, the moons and the seasons passed, and then the locusts came. It had not happened for many a long year. The elders said locusts came once in a generation, reappeared every year for 7 years, and then disappeared for another lifetime. They went back to their caves in a distant land where they were guarded by a race of stunted men. And then after another lifetime, these men opened the caves again, and the locusts came to Umlofia. So a couple of things. When you encounter something that you are unfamiliar with in your reading, if it's possible, you should Google what it is so that you learn more about it. So if you're not sure what locusts are, I would definitely encourage you to Google to find out about them. And there's kind of different layers that I would recommend Googling for. So when you're reading literature, you need to keep in mind that a lot of times there is important significance or symbolism to specific details in the text. Locusts are a type of bug. I would definitely Google the image so that you can kind of see what they look like. They're big and they're like gross. But there are details about locusts that you'll want to know to help you get a deeper understanding too. So for one thing, they are often considered disgusting to Westerners, but for other people in the world, they're actually considered a delicacy, and they're used for meals. So if you really want to see kind of what that looks like, you can Google locust recipes and then click images, and you can kind of see like how sometimes they are prepared. But when it comes to symbolism, you'll find that locusts have a very Christian connotation. They're actually one of the plagues in the Bible, so that can add a little bit of a deeper meaning to your reading of this chapter. I also want to point out that the number 7 again is repeating in this chapter, and we saw that in chapter 1, like on page 1, where the number 7 repeated 3 times, both very biblical meanings behind those. Let me see. So yeah, so that's the first thing. When you encounter things you're unfamiliar with, make sure you Google them if you can. Now, the second thing is if you can't, like if you aren't in a testing situation, for example, then you should use context clues to try to figure out what the meaning of something is. So in this case, as we continue reading, you'll be able to see, like, if you didn't know what locusts were, you can kind of infer based on the way that they're describing it in the book. They came, the locusts, in the cold Harmattan season after the harvest had been gathered, and ate up all the wild grass in the fields. Okonkwo and the 2 boys were working on the red outer walls of the compound. This was one of the lighter tasks of the after-harvest season. A new cover of thick palm branches and palm leaves was set on the walls to protect them from the next rainy season. Okonkwo worked on the outside of the wall, and the boys worked from within. There were little holes from one side to the other in the upper levels of the wall, and through these Okonkwo passed the rope or tie to the boys, and they passed it round the wooden stays and then back to him. And in this way the cover was strengthened on the wall. The women had gone to the bush to collect firewood, and the little children to visit their playmates in the neighboring compounds. The Harmattan was in the air, and seemed to distill a hazy feeling of sleep on the world. Okonkwo and the boys worked in complete silence, which was only broken when a new palm frond was lifted onto the wall or when a busy hen moved dry leaves about in her ceaseless search for food. And then quite suddenly, a shadow fell on the world, and the sun seemed hidden behind a thick cloud. Okonkwo looked up from his work and wondered if it was going to rain at such an unlikely time of the year. But almost immediately a shout of joy broke out in all directions, and Umuofia, which had dozed in the noonday haze, broke into life and activity. "Locusts are descending," was joyfully chanted everywhere, and men, women, and children left their work or their play and ran into the open to see the unfamiliar sight. The locusts had not come for many, many years, and only the old people had seen them before. At first, a fairly small swarm came. They were the harbingers sent to survey the land, and then appeared on the horizon a slowly moving mass like a boundless sheet of black cloud drifting towards Umuofia. Soon it covered half the sky, and the solid mass was now broken by tiny eyes of light like shining stardust. What a beautiful way to describe disgusting bugs. It was a tremendous sight full of power and beauty. Everyone was now about, talking excitedly and praying that the locusts should camp in Umuofia for the night. For although locusts had not visited Umuofia for many years, everybody knew by instinct that they were very good to eat. And at last the locusts did descend. They settled on every tree and on every blade of grass. They settled on the roofs and covered the bare ground. Mighty tree branches broke away under them, and the whole country became the brown earth color of the vast, hungry swarm. Many people went out with baskets trying to catch them, but the elders counseled patience till nightfall, and they were right. The locusts settled in the bushes for the night, and their wings became wet with dew. Then all Umuofia turned out in spite of the cold Harmattan, and everyone filled his bags and pots with locusts. The next morning they were roasted in clay pots and then spread in the sun until they became dry and brittle. And for many days this rare food was eaten with solid palm oil. Okonkwo sat in his obi crunching happily with Ikamafuna and Nuoye and drinking palm wine copiously when Agbuefi Ezwedi came in. Ezwedu was the oldest man in this quarter of Umuofia. He had been a great and fearless warrior in his time and was now accorded great respect in all the clan. He refused to join in the meal and asked Okonkwo to have a word with him outside. And so they walked together, the old man supporting himself with his stick. When they were out of earshot, he said to Okonkwo, "That boy calls you father. Don't bear a hand in his death." Okonkwo was surprised and was about to say something when the old man continued. "Yes, Umuofia has decided to kill him. The Oracle of the Hills and the Caves has pronounced it. They'll take him outside Umuofia, as is the custom, and kill him there. But I want you to have nothing to do with it. He calls you his father." The next day, a group of elders from all the 9 villages of Umuofia came to Okonkwo's house early in the morning, and before they began to speak in low tones, Nuoye and Ikamafuna were sent out. They did not stay very long, but when they went away, Okonkwo sat still for a very long time, supporting his chin on his palms. Later in the day, he called Ikamafuna and told him that he was to be taken home the next day. Nuoye overheard it and burst into tears, whereupon his father beat him heavily. I want you to think about the characterization that's happening here in this paragraph for primarily Nuoye and Okonkwo. We see that Nuoye has a very deep connection to who he perceives now as his brother, Ikamafuna. We would think that Nuoye would be glad for Ikamafuna, and he probably would be glad for Ikamafuna, thinking that he is going to be sent home. That's what they're telling Ikamafuna and Nuoye, that Ikamafuna is going to go back to his village. You would think Nuoye would be excited about that, but we're seeing through his despair that he has a really deep connection now to Ikamafuna, and he doesn't think of him just as a friend. He thinks of him as being a member of the family. Through through Okonkwo's reaction, we are seeing again that this is a man who does have really deep feelings. He is not some evil person that's incapable of feeling emotion. He is simply afraid of being afraid. And so he's willing to do whatever it takes to hide those emotions from people. And so we can sense that he is distraught over the news about Ikemefuna and that he is going to be killed. But instead of mourning the loss of Ikemefuna or trying to do something about it, he beats Nwoye in his emotional state. As for Ikemefuna, he was at a loss. His own home had gradually become very faint and distant, so we have to assume that it's been a while since he was like living in his original home, and so it's kind of faded. The memory of it has faded for him, and he is definitely thinking of Okonkwo's compound as being his home now. He still missed his mother and his sister and would be very glad to see them, but somehow he knew he was not going to see them. And so here we have characterization of Ikemefuna as being old enough to be insightful. Something is making him feel like this is not right, like this is not the truth, that there's something deeper about to happen to him. He remembered once when men had talked in low tones with his father, and it seemed now as if it was happening all over again. The last time he heard men talk in low tones, of course, was when they took him from his home and brought him to Umuofia. Later, Nwoye went to his mother's hut and told her that Ikemefuna was going home. She immediately dropped her pestle with which she was grinding pepper, folded her arms across her breast, and sighed. Poor child. So she knows. The next day, the men returned with a pot of wine. They were all fully dressed as if they were going to a big clan meeting or to pay a visit to a neighboring village. They passed their cloths under the right armpit and hung their goatskin bags and sheathed machetes over their left shoulders. Okonkwo got ready, and the party set out with Ikemefuna carrying the pot of wine. A deathly silence descended on Okonkwo's compound. Even the very little children seemed to know. Throughout that day, Nwoye sat in his mother's hut, and tears stood in his eyes. At the beginning of their journey, the men of Umuofia talked and laughed about the locusts, about their women, and about some effeminate men who had refused to come with them. Effeminate means feminine. That's the root, is feminine. But as they drew near to the outskirts of Umuofia, silence fell upon them too. The sun rose slowly to the center of the sky, and the dry, sandy footway began to throw up the heat that lay buried in it. We're seeing heat again. We're seeing sandiness. We're seeing dryness, all of these associated with Okonkwo and his kind of symbolic inability to produce or sustain life. Some birds chirruped in the forest around. The men trod dry leaves on the sand. All else was silent. Then from the distance came the faint beating of the ekwe. It rose and faded with the wind, a peaceful dance from a distant clan. It's an Ozo dance, the men said among themselves, but no one was sure where it was coming from. Some said Ezemili, others Abaime or Aninta. They argued for a short while and fell into silence again, and the elusive dance rose and fell with the wind. Somewhere a man was taking one of the titles of his clan, with music and dancing and a great feast. The footway had now become a narrow line in the heart of the forest. The short trees and sparse undergrowth which surrounded the men's village began to give way to giant trees and climbers which perhaps had stood from the beginning of things, untouched by the axe and the bushfire. The sun breaking through their leaves and branches threw a pattern of light and shade on the sandy footway. Ikemefuna heard a whisper close behind him and turned round sharply. The man who had whispered now called out aloud, urging the others to hurry up. "We still have a long way to go," he said. Then he and another man went before Ikemefuna and set a faster pace. Thus the men of Umuofia pursued their way, armed with sheathed machetes, and Ikemefuna, carrying a pot of palm wine on his head, walked in their midst. Although he had felt uneasy at first, he was not afraid now. Okonkwo walked behind him. He could hardly imagine that Okonkwo was not his real father. He had never been fond of his real father, and at the end of 3 years, he had become very distant indeed. But his mother and his 3-year-old sister, of course, she would not be 3 now, but 6. Would he recognize her now? She must have grown quite big. How his mother would weep for joy and thank Okonkwo for having looked after him so well and for bringing him back. She would want to hear everything that had happened to him in all those years. Could he remember them all? He would tell her about Nuoye and his mother and about the locusts. Then quite suddenly a thought came upon him. His mother might be dead. He tried in vain to force the thought out of his mind, and then he tried to settle the matter the way he used to settle such matters when he was a little boy. He still remembered the song. Easy Alina Alina, Sala, Easy Ekewe Ya, Ekwaba Aqua Oleg Boli, Ebe Dande Neche Ease, Ebe Uzuzu Nete Egwu, Sala. What we're getting here is we're getting insight into kind of what's happening in Ikemefuna's mind as he's essentially going on this death march. He's not, like, he feels like something bad is going to happen, but he is still a boy and he's not really sure what's going on. He's been told that he's going back to his original village, and so by bringing us into this young boy's mind, I think that the author is helping build pathos. So we're getting closer to him. We're learning more about him. We're hearing about his mom. We're associating his relationship with his mom and his sister with relationships that we have with our family. We're empathizing with him. We're empathizing with the distance that he felt toward his father and the connection that he felt with Okonkwo. And all of this is making him a more complex human being in our minds. And it's going to hurt us further when we get to his inevitable death, which we know is coming. He sang it in his mind and walked to its beat. If the song ended on his right foot, his mother was alive. If it ended on his left, she was dead. No, not dead, but ill. It ended on the right. She was alive and well. He sang the song again, and it ended on the left, but the second time didn't count. This is like, if you relate this to like little games that you used to play maybe when you were a kid, like for me, I remember we used to do like step on the crack, break your mother's back was like a game thing where you tried like not to step on cracks in pavement or sidewalks or whatever, because like your mom would break her back. It's kind of like a game like that for him. So that detail is helping us to remember that this is just a little boy, just an innocent boy. The first voice gets to Chukwu, or God's house. That was a favorite saying of children. Ikemefuna felt like a child once more. It must be the thought of going home to his mother. One of the men behind him cleared his throat. Ikemefuna looked back, and the man growled at him to go on and to not stand looking back. That definitely has a double meaning right there. So literally, like, he turned to look at the guy and he tells him, don't look back. But the deeper meaning obviously is don't focus on the past. It will only make you sad. The way he said it sent cold fear down Ikemefuna's back. His hands trembled vaguely on the black pot that he carried. Why had Okonkwo withdrawn to the rear? Ikemefuna felt his legs melting under him, and he was afraid to look back. As the man who had cleared his throat drew up and raised his machete, Okonkwo looked away. He heard the blow. I need you to visualize this. I need you to imagine what is happening, because this will not impact you if you do not visualize it. So they're walking, they're really far away from the village now. They're in the middle of the forest. They've been walking for a while. Okonkwo was with Ikemefuna, maybe in the front. Now he's in the back. Ikemefuna's like, I don't know why. My dad is gone now. This guy that clears his throat, Ikemefuna turns to look at him, and the guy says, turn forward, don't look back. And he's saying that because he's about to kill him with a machete. And if you don't know what that is, Google it and click images. But it's like a big forest clearing knife. It's a weapon. As the man who had cleared his throat drew up and raised his machete, Okonkwo looked away. He heard the blow. That's where the guy hits Ikamifuna with the knife, the machete. The pot Ikamifuna was holding fell to the sand. He heard Ikamifuna cry, "My father, they have killed me," as he ran toward him. Ikamifuna is running toward Okonkwo. He's running toward his dad, the man that he trusts, the man that he loves, and he is looking for protection. Ikamifuna wants Okonkwo to save him, and Okonkwo draws his machete and cuts him down. Why does he do this? It says Okonkwo was afraid of being thought weak. As soon as his father walked in that night, Nwoye knew that Ikamifuna had been killed, and something seemed to give way inside him like the snapping of a tightened bow. He did not cry. He just hung limp. He had had the same kind of feeling not long ago during the last harvest season. Every child loved the harvest season. Those who were big enough to carry even a few yams in a tiny basket went with grown-ups to the farm. And if they couldn't help in digging up the yams, they could gather firewood together for roasting the ones that would be eaten there on the farm. This roasted yam soaked in red palm oil and eaten in the open farm was sweeter than any meal at home. It was after such a day at the farm during the last harvest that Nwoye had felt for the first time a snapping inside him like the one he felt now. They were returning home with baskets of yams from a distant farm across the stream when they heard the voice of an infant crying in the thick forest. A sudden hush had fallen on the women who had been talking, and they had quickened their steps. So Okonkwo comes home. Have you ever had an experience where you looked at your parents and you knew something horrible happened? Because that is what's happening with Nwoye when Okonkwo comes home. Like, he knows, like, nobody has to say anything. He knows that his brother, who he loved, is dead. And this kind of puts him into this flashback. And this is a flashback where he recalls the only other time in his life where he felt this kind of internal snapping feeling. He says he was out doing fun stuff on this farm when he was a little boy. And on the way home, they heard an infant crying in the forest. And you would think that people would go and be like, "Oh my gosh, it's a baby. Like, let's go save this child. Let's find this child and make sure that this child is okay." But instead, people ignored it. Nwoye had heard that twins were put in earthenware pots and thrown away in the forest, but he had never yet come across them. A vague chill had descended on him, and his head had seemed to swell, like a solitary walker at night who passes an evil spirit on the way. Then something had given way inside him. It descended on him again, this feeling, when his father walked in that night after killing Ikamifuna. Chapter 7 is really hard to read, so I want you to go on to Nearpod, do the accompanying activities for that, and hopefully we'll get something a little bit lighter soon here. All right, I will talk to you guys later.